Hi, I'm Ed Weirauch, and I'm coming to you today from the Mill, co-working space in Wilmington. We're going to talk about how important resumes are, of course, in the job search, and some key factors that have resumes a little different in recent years. First, I want to encourage you, though, if you're a small business, not to consider joining the Mill. Joining the Mill. A friend of mine told me about 2 years ago, you need to be at the Mill. Very matter of fact, there was no discussion. And I was like, okay, she's very successful. She's a nice person. I'm doing what she says. And it was really one of the best decisions I had ever made for my business. I've met clients here. I've made friends here. Friends from outside of here have become members. It's a beautiful atmosphere and environment. It's pretty quiet here these days because of the pandemic. It's very safe. Everybody's 6 feet apart and wearing masks. But as the pandemic lifts, this is going to once again be a real hub of activity. It's almost like the Main Street, I think, of the 21st century. One day, let's see, the governor, representative, and a senator were all here, and they weren't here together. So you never know who's going to come through here. And it's a great place to have your business and to give you an alternative from working at home by yourself all the time. I want to tell you that I had a big party for myself here last year. I couldn't have had it anywhere else, space-wise. And it's a little challenging now. Every time I look out over the community space and think about 50 of my closest friends were here that day, and now we don't have that many, that's going to change soon. And hopefully you'll be one of the people that's here. So today we're going to talk about resumes, especially in this environment that we're in, with the job market as it is. But as I'm telling my clients, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This vaccine is out there. This morning I heard that 11% of the Delaware population has been vaccinated, so we're making progress. So it's a real good time to get your resume together. So what I want to offer you is a free coaching session. Career coaching, what's that? Well, oftentimes it's working with you to put together a good resume. It can be exploring some career options, career assessments. If you've got an interview in a couple days and you're scared to death, people have come in and that's what we've talked about. That's a career coach or a career counselor, what they do. And, just a very little bit about my background. I worked in marketing and public relations and still do some of that. But my work study job at Rutgers in New Jersey was in the career planning and placement office. So I've always been tuned to this field. Resumes really took on a different identity with the recession of 2008-9 and probably today too. And that's because all kinds of people are applying for all kinds of jobs. So hiring managers are left deluged with resumes. As a result, there's a new approach to the information that goes on your resume, and that's the information I'm going to talk about today. First of all, when all of these resumes started pouring in to hiring managers and recruiters, they needed something to somehow sift through them, especially because lots of people were applying for jobs that they had no business applying for. So that's when keywords and phrases in a resume became most important, because recruiters and hiring managers have software called applicant tracking systems, ATS. And they'll type at their desk 10, 11, maybe 12 keywords and phrases that the person that they hire has to have, or should have as many as possible on their resume. Then only the people with a good number of those keywords and phrases, only their resume will go to the hiring manager. Seems like a number of people that I work with are fairly familiar with this concept, but the way I do it and the companies that I work with, we don't count on the hiring manager finding those keywords and phrases. We put them in a section by themselves. I say we're going to put them up in lights so neither computer nor human being can ever miss them. And one of the real motivations to this is, in my field, we know that hiring managers spend an average of 6 to 7 seconds per resume. It's pretty drastic, but I think it's true. What I think they're doing is they've got one eye on their computer, just like you do, and the other eye is maybe glancing at a pile of resumes, or they're looking at them, they're scrolling on their screen. So we need to put resumes together with the thought, don't expect them to think. Don't make them do any work. Just one example of that is your email address really should be your first and last name. And then sometimes if it's a common name, you have to add numbers or something. Let's say I, use Ed Bike Tour because I'm a big bike rider as my email address. No. Because then we're expecting the hiring manager to stop in his tracks and think, oh, what's this guy's name? You don't even want to do that. Just hit it so they can click on your name and the email comes to you. The next part of your resume that is a new concept somewhat that's really important is to feature what we call career highlights or star stories, situation, task, action, result. And we want to make sure that they are in an area of your resume where they stand alone. Lots of times I'll find star stories buried in people's resumes. And I think back to when I was in journalism school and my professor would say, you need to work on that. You've buried the lead. The most important part of the story maybe was in the 7th or 8th paragraph. It's buried. So again, we're not expecting that hiring manager to do any thinking or any work. So we have to bring that up and highlight it. The keywords and phrases and the career highlights are what we call above the fold. And some people might know what that means, some people might not. In the old days, when people read newspapers, above the fold, the biggest news of the day was on the top half. War declared, Biden elected, vaccine approved. It's the same with your resume. In fact, the reader should really not have to go beyond the top third or half of your resume to make any decisions because, same old thing, he or she won't. He or she is too busy doing other things and looking at your resume. So the idea is to really capture who you are, what you can do for the company. We sometimes call this your brand. I'll give you some examples. I'll take one from my own background. So I worked for 30 years or more in marketing and public relations, especially doing press relations, improving an organization's standing among the media, improving their reputation, that sort of thing. Career highlights, the best ones are what I call episodic. So I would say that I increased media coverage of a hospital system in New Jersey where I worked by 300%, by building relationships with reporters, returning their calls, developing stories, and accommodating them, just very briefly. And then you always want to think, okay, now 300%. If somebody asks me, prove it. Well, they had no coverage, that hospital system, in the year before I went to work there. And after I was working there, there were like 300 newspaper clippings and radio and TV stories. So that's why I came up with the number 300. Another example that I think is more common for people working on your resumes, again, I'll take it from my own experience. I do have other people's examples, so I was working at AstraZeneca here in Wilmington, and when they reduced their staff, I went to a career coach like that I'm doing now, and he said, okay, Ed, we got to come up with some highlights here. Tell me about AstraZeneca. And my answer was, everything was team-oriented. An agency did the work. I don't know. I don't think I could put anything for that. Oh, Ed, what's this here about a new approval by the FDA? Well, a drug that I worked on, the marketing of it, got a new approval that it was effective and safe for women of childbearing years. That's the technical way they describe it. And my coach said, well, did you write that press release? Oh, yeah, actually. And did anybody pick it up? Oh, yeah, we were on the Today Show, all kinds of media. And how many additional hits did you get to your website? Do you know? Oh, yeah, like 60,000, I think I was told, in the first month. He looks at me. There's your highlight, Ed. I never thought of it that way, I said. Lots of times people are not good at identifying career highlights because it feels like they're bragging. But when I started writing resumes, I thought, oh, well, I'll probably have to rein some people in, exaggerating, lying. Let me tell you, 95% of resumes that I've written, people are not comfortable talking about what they've done and what they've contributed. And so I want to give you this advice. If you feel hesitant, if you have career highlights, but you feel hesitant about bragging, I want you to hear me ask this question. If you don't tell them, how will they know? So if I wasn't going to brag, which I wasn't doing, about press coverage that I generated, especially since I had moved to Wilmington, I wasn't even where I worked before, unless I told them, how would they know? And you have to do the same thing. That's all your resume is doing. And to get back to that really busy hiring manager, you're making his or her job easier by pointing out, this is why you want to hire me. Because the end goal of those keywords and phrases, and especially the career highlights, you want that hiring manager to say, he did that for such and such a company. She can do it for us. Call her. And they're not going to do that if you have a resume that has like what's expected of you on a job. This is an exaggeration, but you'll get the idea. Showed up every day at 9 o'clock. Other duties as assigned. I've actually seen resumes with that on it. No, you really need to put down there the impact and the value that you brought to an organization. I sometimes encourage people to talk to their former manager, former coworkers, and ask them, what could you really count on me for? If I asked that of somebody that I worked with, let's say 15 years ago, they would say, oh, Ed, you got us all kinds of press coverage. So that's what you got to play up. And I even sometimes tell people, I don't have to say older people, but people of my generation, just tell them some guy that's writing your resume is really badgering you to come up with this. Then you don't feel as though you're bragging. Just put the blame on me. It makes it it sort of takes the edge off. Another important point about resumes now in the 21st century, and this is something that I see 70% of the time on current resumes. People have copied the job description and pasted it onto their resume. Real bad, very bad. You don't want to do that, and here's why. A job description tells what was expected of anybody in that job. Your resume needs to tell what you in particular did, contributed, achieved in that job. The other reason, of course, is hiring managers, when they're not looking for people, they're writing job descriptions. They're going to see right away. And then that's the reflection on you is, this person doesn't think much. And that's the last thing that you want the person at the other end to be thinking. Some people just assume that their resume has to be one page. If you have about 5 years experience or less, one page. But if you've been working for 15 or 20 years, there's no problem with 2 pages. As long as, in the end, it's about 1.5 pages. Not only does the information have to be concise, it has to look that way. So, in other words, you don't want to give someone your resume with thick blocks of copy. And I'll give you an analogy. If you look in a print magazine, maybe newspaper, pharmaceutical ads, one page will be, a picture of people, maybe they're out riding their bikes because it's for arthritis, let's say. And then on the opposite page, it'll be all this copy that basically, clears people from suing them, wrong claims. It's that page that nobody ever actually reads. So you want your resume to be more like the page with the picture of the people riding the bikes than the side effects page. And so you might think, it's my resume. How are people going to know what I did? That's when you really have to work on being concise, having those keywords and phrases, career highlights, because then that's just the slice or chunk of information that you need the hiring managers to get. Then when you go for the job interview, the time it takes for the administrative person to say, Mary Smith is here for her interview, that's the time period that the hiring manager reads the rest. Like the dates that you were on a job, what your titles were. It's important that they're there, but it's not highlighted. Chances are that's the only time they're going to pay attention to that stuff. And then towards the bottom, you put your bachelor's, master's, whatever your degree is. If you're someone with 5 years or less experience, especially if you're a recent grad, your education you can put up towards the top of your resume. But if you have 15 years of experience, it's important that you have a degree, but where you got it and what it's in doesn't matter as much as the work that you've done. Similar to that, ageism is a really big factor out there. There's no doubt about it. So we really only go back 10 or maybe 15 years
describing a person's experience. Earlier job titles we can put on the resume, but lots of times we don't put a year. And they're not allowed to ask you for those years. You know, the hiring manager wants to know what you've done lately or recently. Again, from my own experience, many, many years ago, I actually had the chance to be the press person for Mother Teresa. And I really need to say no more at that. It was such a rare experience. So that coach that I mentioned earlier, I was saying, I'm just not hearing any feedback. And, I'm past 40 now, and public relations is a young field. And he said, well, Ed, you just have to take the details off of your early job, like the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, Mother Teresa. I mean, that was back in the 80s. I won't say specifically when. And I said, oh, no, I'm not taking Mother Teresa off my resume. I mean, that was a highlight. Well, eventually I did, because I said that it's a young field, and I was aging myself by putting the year that I did that job. And I did start to get calls for job interviews after that. And lots of highlights, including the approval that I talked about earlier. That was more important in getting a job than the Mother Teresa thing, because it was just in the year prior to when I was out looking that time. Some other important points: you want to make sure that you have a good size font, and you want it to be a fairly conservative one. These applicant tracking systems, they actually reject resumes that have any kind of a graphic element to them. Somebody I worked with yesterday had a nice resume, and on the top there was like a green bar, at least an inch, maybe 2 inches thick, and then her name was in that. Looks pretty nice. Those applicant tracking systems were spitting it out. So she was getting no pickup for her resume. I feel badly when I have to tell people that, because some people spend money, on that sort of thing, but it's not getting read. It's best to go with a conservative or traditional format, if for no other reason than you want to get it through the applicant tracking system. But also because, again, you got to think about that person at the other end and make it as easy as possible. I've had current resumes where I really have to go looking, and then I find the good stuff. Hiring managers aren't going to look. They're going to take your resume and they'll think, looks good, but I'll read it later. And then maybe they will, or maybe they won't. And you can't take that risk in the economy as it is today, or really any time. There's plenty of competition out there. And you want to have all the information, which is most of what I've talked about, but then you want it to look like it's an easy read. So make sure there's some white space, some breathing room is the best way I can describe it, and not like that page with the pharmaceutical ads. I would tell you that the last thing I'll talk about is a mindset for the job search, going beyond the resume. There's two approaches, very briefly. One is to respond to lots of job postings, send your resume here and there, fill out applications. Unfortunately, many times you hear no response. And your response is, I've sent out like 100 resumes and I haven't heard back from any of them. So you can spend about 10% of your time doing that. The rest of your time, 80, 90%, you should be in touch with your network. 80% of new jobs are found through networking. And I think in a city like Wilmington, it's even higher. So you've got to use LinkedIn. You've got to get reestablished contact with people maybe they went to college with or worked with 5 years ago. And you want to convey that you're just keeping in touch. You're just seeing how they're doing. How is the pandemic affecting you? Those kinds of questions. And then you can say something to the effect of, I'm sending my resume just so you know what my background is. Or, my resume is attached. If you hear of anything, feel free to pass it on. Because what you don't want to do is give the person at the other end the impression that you're hoping or asking them to hire you. And the reason you don't want that to happen is because, very briefly, they can say, oh, sorry, we're not hiring anybody. Guess what? The conversation's over. But if you take that relaxed approach, just making sure people know what's happening, wanted to keep in touch, then they're comfortable and you'll have a better exchange. I think most people out there want to help people looking for jobs, but if they get the impression right off the bat that that's all you're calling for, it's not going to go anywhere. You've got to express interest in the other person to get that relationship going, and then your network will become more active. And finally, I think it's important so you got 10% responding to those ads, 80%, let's say, doing your networking, and then the other 10% of your time really needs to be spent on something that you really enjoy. You have to have a distraction. I think it's good if that involves exercise, gets you out of the house, away from your desk, away from your computer screen. I always say that finding a job is a full-time job. Psychologically, it's a real challenge. So you want to have that distraction where you can just, okay, I'm doing everything that I can. I'm connecting with as many people as I can. It's okay if I take an hour out of my day to go for a run or meet a friend for lunch, and we can do that again. You'll be much more effective at your job search if you have this time away from it than if you're just planted there at your desk looking for more work. My website is Weirauch, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Again, it's Ed Weirauch, Weirauch. Yeah, you could come to the mill. I get here almost every day.